Dust hung in the air like a living thing, curling in thin spirals between the jagged ribs of ruined buildings. The wind threaded through them in long, hollow notes, as if the city itself were sighing. Once, this had been a capital, dense with life, hot with the glow of neon, buzzing with voices. Now it was all shadow and skeletal steel, a graveyard of towers stripped to bone. In the eastern quadrant, just beyond the collapsed bridge, a craft descended in absolute silence, disturbing the dust in a perfect ring. The Vel'thari scout team emerged in single file, their figures sleek and insectoid under pale, chitinous armor that shimmered faintly. They moved with a strange grace, their clawed feet making no sound on broken concrete. Lead observer Zarnek crouched low, tapping a control plate on the side of his visor. A faint hum rose as his optics cycled through spectrums, infrared, ultraviolet, motion. The landscape lit up in ghostly gradients, but there was nothing living out there. Nothing that mattered. He clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. Clear. Only residual heat signatures from decayed structures. His voice was sharp and metallic in their comms, the tone of one who had done this many times before. Behind him, Relvier adjusted the fit of her shoulder harness, glancing down at a holographic briefing projected from her gauntlet. It showed fuzzy images of human resistance fighters in mismatched uniforms and camouflage nets. One still frame displayed a man lying prone in what looked like a tattered rug. Relvier let out a rasping chitter that was as close to a laugh as her species could produce. They still use this? She zoomed in on the human's covering, a crude mesh tangled with scraps of cloth and grass. Primitive. How does this fool anyone? Torvek, the youngest of the three, leaned closer to look. His eyes glittered with that particular arrogance of fresh recruits. It wouldn't fool a blind larva. They smear themselves in mud, where old ropes hide under rags. Their kind can't even match their surroundings properly. If this is their stealth, no wonder the occupation goes so smoothly. Relvier toggled to another image. A human sniper wrapped in strips of burlap, face blackened with soot. Like watching a cave ape pretending to be a rock. Zarnek let them have their amusement. He remembered his own first years in the field, the thrill of superiority. It was natural to laugh. Humans were primitive, by Vel'thari standards embarrassingly so. They relied on bullets propelled by chemical explosions, body armor that weighed them down, and camouflage that wouldn't pass muster in the Vel'thari Academy's first-year training. Still, his multifaceted eyes swept the ruins again. Mock them if you like, but don't underestimate them, he said quietly. A wounded prey can still gut a careless predator. The remark earned him a dismissive scoff from Torvek, but Relvier's antennae twitched in faint acknowledgement. The team moved deeper into the city. Their exosuits shifted colors in smooth, liquid gradients to match the fractured browns and grays of their surroundings. Dust and dim light turned them into phantoms. They passed a collapsed tram station, its sign half buried under rubble, and stepped over a skeleton still clutching a rusted rifle. Torvek scanned with a handheld device, the beam invisible to human eyes. Nothing alive within 100 meters. Expand to 500, Zarnek ordered. As the readings updated, a faint, erratic thermal echo flickered on the display. Weak and inconsistent, almost like the heat left by a rat crawling over a warm pipe. Torvek adjusted the filter, but the signature blurred and faded. Environmental bleed, he concluded. Probably sun-warmed metal cooling in the shade. Zarnek studied it a moment longer. The signal's pulse had been oddly steady before vanishing, but there were no other indications of life. He filed it away in his mind, then gestured for them to continue. The streets narrowed as they approached the central sector. Tall structures leaned precariously over them, their glassless windows gaping like empty sockets. The only sounds were the crunch of debris under alien claws and the occasional groan of metal under stress. Relvier opened a comm link to the orbiting command vessel. Surface clear so far. No sign of resistance activity. Maintain sweep, came the reply. Intelligence suggests last human holdouts may be concealed in this quadrant. Understood. She closed the channel. They moved in a loose triangle formation, covering each other's angles. It was standard procedure for a low-threat zone. The human presence here had been negligible for years. Any survivors were scattered, desperate and poorly equipped. There was no real danger, only the tedious work of confirming absence. Still, Zarnek's mandibles shifted in thought. He had fought humans before. They lacked elegance, but not tenacity. He remembered the reports from the siege of Ralshur, where a single human sniper delayed an entire Vel'thari advance for 2 full rotations. The kill count had been disproportionately high for such a crude weapon. In the end, they destroyed the building with orbital fire. Even then, they hadn't found the sniper's remains. "Tell me," Relvier said as they passed the skeletal remains of a pedestrian overpass, "why do they persist with camouflage that doesn't work?" Zarnek kept scanning the rooftops. "Because it works for them. They aren't hiding from our eyes. They're hiding from what we think we see." Torvek gave a derisive snort. "Poetic nonsense." "Perhaps," Zarnek murmured, but his gaze lingered on a patch of shadow at the top of a crumbling tower. Just long enough to note that it didn't shift with the wind like the others. The echo returned briefly to Torvek's scanner. He frowned, tapped the side of the device. "Signal interference. This whole city is a mess of heat anomalies." The 3 moved on, their adaptive suits blending perfectly into the shade as they crossed an exposed street. Overhead, the sky was a dull smear of tan and ash. In the distance, somewhere deep in the city, something metallic groaned and fell. The sound was carried on the wind, impossible to pinpoint. Relvier adjusted her rifle, a sleek, coil-driven weapon capable of burning through steel. "Even their sharpshooters are slow," she remarked idly. "We've timed them in drills. Our marksmen fire 5 to their 1. Torvek chuckled. "And they breathe so loudly. I've heard recordings where you can hear their hearts pounding through the walls." "Careful," Zarnek said, scanning another rooftop. "Overconfidence is the first step to making a widow out of yourself." Relvier's antennae twitched again, sensing the edge in his tone. "You think there's something here?" "I think," Zarnek said, "this city feels wrong. Too quiet in the wrong ways." They paused at the edge of a large plaza where weeds pushed through cracked tiles. A dry fountain squatted in the center, its edges marked with scorched scars from some long-past firefight. Zarnek motioned for the others to fan out, scanning as they went. From somewhere high above, a faint glint flashed in the dust-heavy light, there and then gone again. Too brief to mark, too sharp to ignore. Zarnek froze for a fraction of a second, considering whether to raise the alarm. Instead, he clicked into the squad channel. "Maintain helmet sealed. Watch the rooftops." Torvek's laugh was easy. "Still worried about ghosts?" But Zarnek didn't answer. His optics swept every ledge, every shadow, every collapsed wall. Somewhere out there, he thought, something was watching them. The plaza cleared with no incident. Relvier logged the coordinates, and they began moving toward the next sector. As they passed under the skeletal frame of a toppled broadcast tower, Torvek muttered, "Primitive camouflage or not, I almost wish we'd run into one of them. I'd like to see how long they think they can hide." Zarnek's gaze shifted once more to the rooftops. A faint flicker of movement might have been dust catching the light, or it might not. He felt the edge of something ancient and animal stirring in his instincts, the kind that told predators when the forest was watching back. He clicked his mandibles softly, but said nothing. They had another 4 kilometers to sweep, and he could not justify altering the route for a hunch. Yet the image lingered in his mind, the shape in the shadow that didn't breathe, didn't sway, didn't belong. Far above, unseen through their shifting visors and calibrated lenses, a figure lay still against the jagged edge of a ruined wall. Wrapped in rags and dust, its outline was not that of a man, so much as a scrap of the city itself. The rifle rested in line with the broken beams, its glass dull with dirt, its barrel shrouded in torn cloth. The wind carried no scent, no heat worth noting, no sound at all. The Vel'thari scouts moved on, their voices a faint murmur in their comms, unaware that the distance between life and death was already measured. The watcher did not move, did not breathe deeply, only followed them through the crosshairs until they vanished from view. Then the rifle shifted by a hair's breadth, tracking where they would next appear. The hunt had begun. Callen had been lying in the same position for 17 hours. The muscles in his back burned, his elbows ached from the weight of the rifle, but his breathing was steady and shallow, controlled by long practice. Every few minutes, he shifted just enough to ease the cramp in a leg or hand, but never enough to change his silhouette. He knew from experience that even the smallest unnatural movement could betray a position, and the Vel'thari were not creatures you could afford to slip up against. His face was hidden beneath a hooded mesh of shredded fabric, dyed in streaks of gray and rust. From a distance, any distance, it was nothing more than another ragged scrap of the ruined building he occupied. His ghillie suit was layered with scavenged textures, insulation fibers, decayed rope, strips of weathered tarp, fragments of rebar netting. It wasn't beautiful, but beauty had no place in survival. The only measure of its worth was whether it kept him unseen. The rifle cradled in his hands was older than he was. It had passed from one sharpshooter to another, modified, repaired, patched, and wrapped until it no longer resembled the sleek, factory-born thing it once had been. It was stripped of anything that might reflect sunlight. Even the scope's glass had been dulled with a fine smear of dust and ash, enough to kill the shine, but not blur the image. He kept his cheek welded to the stock, one eye pressed to the scope, the other closed. Below, the alien scouts had entered his hunting ground. He had watched their landing from 2 kilometers away, then tracked their progress without once breaking cover. The Vel'thari moved like predators that had never been prey, confident in their armor, certain their scanners told the whole story. That Arrogance was his ally. Callen had learned his craft from men and women who'd fought through the early years of the occupation. Back then, humans still tried to match alien tech with human tech, and they had died in swarms for the mistake. Electronic jammers, active camouflage, heat dampeners, all failed within weeks once the Vel'thari adapted. It was only when the survivors abandoned gadgets for the old ways that the kill ratios shifted. A sniper didn't need to blind a scanner if he never showed up on it in the first place. Camouflage, in Callen's world, wasn't just about sight. It was about sound, scent, and time. The aliens relied heavily on motion detection and heat contrast. He countered with patience, insulation, and control. Every breath was measured, every swallow planned. He ate sparingly before missions to keep his body's metabolic heat low. His heartbeat was as slow as sleep. The squad below paused in a plaza. He could hear faint vibrations through the beam under his chest when they shifted their weight. One of them scanned the rooftops, head tilting slightly, probably the leader. Callen didn't squeeze the trigger. Not yet. Firing wasn't about seeing a target. It was about seeing the right moment when distance, angle, and opportunity aligned into certainty. He watched them fan out. Their armor's shifting colors almost impressed him. The gradient changes were smooth, liquid, like oil flowing across water. But their very confidence in it made them predictable. They assumed they were invisible, so they moved in patterns meant for enemies who could see them. Callen wasn't looking for color shifts. He was watching for unnatural geometry, the curve of shoulder where rubble should be flat, the rhythm of motion where decay was still. One scout broke formation to check the base of a toppled comms tower. The movement exposed a sliver of unarmored neck between plates. Callen marked it mentally and tracked him until the alien returned to position. He thought briefly of his father, a resistance fighter who'd never lived to see the shift in tactics. The old man had believed victory would come from matching the invaders blow for blow. Callen had buried him in a crater with 37 others after a failed assault on a supply depot. That was the day Callen stopped dreaming of battles and started studying hunts. The Vel'thari were predators, but so were wolves, and wolves could be brought down by a patient trapper. All it took was learning their habits, anticipating their moves, and striking without warning. Through the scope, he saw the younger alien, taller, with the restless posture of inexperience, turn his head away from the leader, scanning without focus. That one would be first. Impulsive targets died easiest, and their panic scattered the survivors. Callen adjusted the rifle a fraction, the crosshairs settling just behind the helmet joint. Wind hissed faintly through the gaps in the wall around him. He read the drift from the sway of a hanging cable 20 meters away, adjusted his aim without looking away from the target. His finger rested against the trigger, applying only the lightest pressure waiting for the alien to make the smallest mistake. It came when the scout leaned into the open, scanning upward. His body turned, exposing the gap fully, and for an instant, his helmet visor reflected a shard of weak sunlight. Callen exhaled and squeezed. The rifle coughed once, the sound swallowed by the wind and distance. Through the scope, he saw the alien jerk as if plucked by an invisible hand, then collapse sideways. The armor muted the fall, but the other two turned instantly, scanning with frantic speed. Callen didn't fire again. He slid his eye from the scope and flattened himself against the beam, rifle tucked close. Movement now would be suicide. Instead, he listened to the faint, distorted chatter from the Vel'thari as they argued in their own tongue. Their voices were tight, rapid. They didn't know where the shot had come from, and their scanning sweeps passed over his position without pause. He waited through 3 full sweeps before moving again. The rifle came back up, scope trained on the leader. This one was careful, methodical, keeping his profile low and visor sweeping in arcs. Callen noted the tension in the set of his shoulders, the subtle twitch in his mandibles when he paused. Fear was creeping in at the edges. Still, he didn't take the shot. 1 kill was disruption. 2 in quick succession might drive them to retreat too soon. No, better to let the fear deepen, to make them waste time and energy, to sap their confidence until the city itself seemed to close in around them. He shifted his aim to the 3rd alien, who was moving between cover and short bursts, each time scanning behind rather than ahead. Inexperience again. The Vel'thari had better eyesight than humans, but even they couldn't see what wasn't moving. He tracked the alien's route, mapping the likely points where the line of sight would open fully. Beneath the slow churn of calculation, Callen felt a familiar calm. It wasn't joy. Killing wasn't something he celebrated, but it was a kind of satisfaction, the same a craftsman might take in a flawless cut. Every hunt was a test of discipline against the temptation to rush. The longer he waited, the greater the reward. The aliens regrouped at the far side of the plaza. The leader signaled something, and the remaining 2 shifted positions to cover opposite flanks. Callen followed the inexperienced one's movements again, noting that each sprint between cover grew a little longer, each pause a little shorter. Fatigue would set in soon. When it did, precision would falter. A faint vibration reached him through the beam, a tremor in the ground from the alien's armored steps. It meant they were drawing closer to a street that offered him a clearer, longer shot. He let his breathing slow even further, fingers steady on the stock. Patience. Always patience. The city around him could have been frozen in time. Nothing moving but the slow creep of dust in the air. When a younger alien finally stepped into the open, Callen didn't fire. Not yet. He let the moment stretch, memorizing the angles, the drift of the wind, the exact tension in his trigger finger. The leader's visor swept past his position again, still blind. He would wait until the panic reached the tipping point. Then, and only then, would he strike again. The plaza felt wrong now. Zarnek could sense it in the way the air seemed to tighten around them. How every creak of ruined metal sounded like a deliberate signal. The younger scout's body still lay crumpled in the dust, heat leaking away in a dim haze. The shot had been clean, too clean. No warning, no visible muzzle flash, no discernible trajectory. One heartbeat the soldier had been upright, the next he was gone. Relvier crouched beside the corpse, her mandibles tight. No plasma burn. Puncture wound through the neck joint. Projectile weapon, primitive caliber. Her tone was almost disbelief. Who fires solid rounds in this century? Someone who knows we can't trace them easily, Zarnek said, scanning the rooftops again. The shadows seemed thicker now, more deliberate. Our cloaks don't matter if the enemy isn't looking for light shifts. Torvek's absence was a void between them. His arrogance had evaporated with his life, leaving only the reminder that death here could arrive without sound. Relvier straightened, shifting her stance to cover their flanks. The plaza was a killing ground. Open center, multiple high vantage points. If the shooter had chosen this location, it was because it favored him. The leader's voice lowered to a growl. We move. Stay to cover. Don't stop scanning. They advanced toward a narrow alley choked with debris, each step measured. Zarnek kept his head moving, optics shifting through spectrums in rapid sequence. Still nothing. No heat spike, no movement signature. The alien mind struggled against a creeping thought. Perhaps the human wasn't moving at all. Halfway through the alley, something metallic pinged off a wall to their left. It was a tiny sound, almost lost in the wind, but it pulled Relvier's aim toward the rooftops. She fired a quick burst from her coil rifle, the charged rounds slicing into the upper stories. Glass and dust rained down, but no target fell. That was deliberate, she said. Zarnek agreed. It was misdirection, a lure to draw their aim while the shooter adjusted position. He had seen this kind of tactic in old war reports. Human snipers using ricochet and noise to make enemies waste ammunition. The fact that they were being manipulated at all gnawed at him. They cleared the alley and entered a courtyard. The buildings leaned in, casting long shadows that merged overhead. Every window was a black eye. Zarnek felt the urge to order a retreat, but he knew that giving ground in panic would only make them easier prey. A flicker of motion caught Relvier's eye, a shadow shifting high on the eastern wall. She fired again, but the shape dissolved into debris, and the sound of the shot seemed to echo from every direction at once. Zarnek caught a different movement, a length of wire swaying where there was no wind. He raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the second shot came. Relvier's body jerked as the round struck just below her left shoulder plate, punching through the thinner armor at the joint. She collapsed behind a fragment of wall, hissing in pain. The wound wasn't fatal, but it was enough to slow her. Zarnek dropped beside her, scanning the angles. The shooter hadn't taken the kill when it was offered. Instead, he'd gone for a disabling shot. That meant he wanted them off balance, forcing mistakes. He's playing with us, Relvier said through clenched mandibles. No, Zarnek corrected, he's studying us. He left her in partial cover and moved to a position where he could watch the upper levels without exposing himself. A part of him wanted to call for extraction immediately, but the comms were unreliable here, the ruins blocking their signal. They would need to reach higher ground to transmit clearly, higher ground that would also expose them further. The courtyard was silent now, save for the faint scrape of debris under his feet. Even the wind seemed to have faded. Zarnek imagined a shooter somewhere above, eyes fixed through a scope, patient as stone. Humans had no natural cloaking, no advanced optics, yet somehow this one had made himself invisible. He thought of the images they'd mocked earlier, the crude nets and ragged coverings. The joke curdled in his mind. Perhaps this was what those images never captured. The stillness, the blending of body to ruin, the suppression of every telltale signal until the shooter was nothing more than another fragment of the city. Relvier's breathing grew shallow but controlled. She kept her rifle ready, her eyes scanning windows and ledges. Her earlier confidence had been stripped away, leaving a sharper, more calculating edge. "We can't find him," she said. "We don't need to," Zarnek replied. "We only need to move him." He fired 2 quick bursts into opposite corners of the rooftops, then immediately shifted position. The sound of impact rolled through the ruins, and somewhere in that noise, he thought he heard the faintest shuffle of fabric. Not much, but enough to tell him the sniper wasn't a phantom. They edged toward a stairwell that would take them up to a collapsed office floor. Higher elevation might give them a better read on angles, though it would also paint them as targets. Zarnek weighed the risk and decided it was better than being hunted on the ground. The stairwell smelled of rust and stale water. Each step groaned under their weight, announcing their ascent to any ears above. Relvier took the lead despite her injury, her rifle sweeping ahead. They reached the top and moved into the half-collapsed room. Through gaps in the wall, they could see across the plaza where Torvek had fallen. The view confirmed Zarnek's suspicion. There were a dozen viable sniper positions around that kill zone. A faint metallic click drew his gaze to the opposite building. For an instant, he thought he saw a sliver of cloth ripple against the stone. He brought his rifle up, but the image was already gone. Then another shot rang out, not at them, but at the wall beside Relvier. The round struck stone, sending fragments into her side. She hissed and dropped flat. The shot was a warning, or perhaps a test of their reactions. Zarnek's mandibles clenched. The sniper wasn't rushing. He could have killed her, but he'd chosen not to. This wasn't just a hunt. It was control, the predator dictating the pace. He scanned the horizon again, feeling the first true spark of unease. They weren't moving him at all. He was moving them, hurting them exactly where he wanted them to be. Relvier caught his eye. If we stay, we die. He nodded once. They would need to break line of sight completely, vanish into the ruins until they could regroup. That meant retreating through the maze of lower streets, using the buildings as shields. They began to withdraw, moving fast but careful, keeping to shadows. Every now and then, a sound behind them, a rock falling, a faint scrape, kept their nerves taut. Each time they froze, scanning, they found nothing. But the knowledge was there, heavy as a hand on the back of the neck. The sniper was following. By the time they reached the edge of the sector, Relvier's pace had slowed. The wound was draining her strength. Zarnek knew they couldn't keep this up much longer without making a fatal mistake. He considered sending her ahead while he held position, but he suspected the sniper would predict that too. A soft, deliberate clang echoed from somewhere above, like metal settling, but in a pattern too clean to be accidental. Zarnek didn't even look up. The sound was meant to draw his gaze. Instead, he kept moving, forcing his instincts into discipline. The last alley before the safer zone was narrow, lined with rusted pipes and leaning walls. As they entered, Zarnek's gut tightened. This was a choke point, perfect for an ambush. Halfway through, a piece of brick fell from above, shattering on the ground ahead of them. Relvier froze. Zarnek raised his weapon, but there was no second shot, no movement, just the quiet certainty that they were still inside his crosshairs. They cleared the alley without incident, but Zarnek knew this wasn't over. The sniper hadn't missed. He had simply let them go, for now. Somewhere behind them, a human lay hidden in the ruins, already anticipating their next move. The hunt, Zarnek realized, was not in their control at all. And the worst part was knowing the human knew it. Relvier's breathing had grown ragged, a faint rasp echoing inside her helmet. The wound in her shoulder oozed dark fluid that slicked the edge of her armor, each step pulling a shiver through her frame. Zarnek kept one arm ready to steady her, but never slowed his own scan of their surroundings. The sniper's silence was a presence all its own, stretching across every empty street and shadowed corner. They were not escaping him. They were simply moving deeper into the path he had chosen. The comm channel crackled, faint and broken. Zarnek tried transmitting a priority code to the orbiting vessel, but the ruins swallowed the signal before it could stabilize. He cursed in his native tongue, a low, guttural sound. Without air support, their odds of survival dropped into fractions. Relvier's mandibles tightened. He could have killed us already. Why hasn't he? Because he's patient, Zarnek said. Patience is a weapon, and he's sharpening it on us. They reached a crumbling stairwell leading into the underworks of a collapsed commercial block. The darkness below was thick, damp, and heavy with the scent of mold and corroded metal. Zarnek motioned for them to descend. Inside, the narrow corridors muffled the wind, replacing it with the constant drip of unseen water. For the first time in hours, there was no vantage point for the sniper to exploit. They moved through the maze of concrete supports, past skeletal escalators and rotting signage. Zarnek's mind replayed the earlier shots in perfect clarity, the precision, the timing, the restraint. Whoever this human was, he had been trained by masters who understood that a sniper's truest weapon was control over the battlefield's tempo. A faint vibration shivered through the floor. Not footsteps, too dispersed for that. It was the thrum of distant impacts, perhaps structural shifts. Zarnek slowed, realizing the sound was following them, moving when they moved. The human was tracking them even without line of sight. Relvier leaned against a pillar, catching her breath. Her visor's glow cast thin light across her mandibles, and in that glow Zarnek saw something shift in her expression. Not fear, Exactly, but an understanding that they had become the hunted in a war they thought they owned. "We need height," he said. "The only way to transmit a distress call is to breach the upper levels again. We'll make him work to hold position." Relvier's laugh was bitter. "And climb right into his range." "Yes," Zarnek answered, "but this time on our terms." They navigated upward through the wreckage, each step measured to avoid loose rubble. The ascent was slow, giving the sniper ample time to adjust, but there was no other path. At the top, they emerged into a shattered office floor with one intact wall overlooking the central sector. The light outside was dimming, the ash-filled sky bleeding toward dusk. Callen lay in the ruins opposite, exactly where he had been for hours. The aliens had moved as he'd anticipated, their patterns bending unconsciously toward the kill zone he'd mapped in his mind before the hunt even began. Through the scope, he watched them appear in the frame, their armor catching the fading light. The wounded one favored her left side now, slower, more deliberate, but still capable of returning fire. The leader's posture was taut, every motion deliberate. He respected that discipline. Most soldiers in their situation would have panicked by now. These two had adapted slightly, but not enough. They were still thinking in terms of closing distance, of chasing or being chased. Callen wasn't in either of those games. The crosshairs rested on the wounded alien's visor. He could enter here, but there was a certain clarity in letting the leader watch first. Fear that was personal carved deeper than fear that was shared. Zarnek felt the hairline crack of awareness in his instincts, the subtle tightening that came a moment before danger struck. He shoved Relvier sideways, just as a round punched through the pillar where her head had been. The sound was soft, but its effect immediate. He dragged her behind cover, scanning the angles. The shot had come from across the sector, perfect alignment through two collapsed walls. "He's far," Relvier hissed, but not far enough. They returned fire in quick bursts, tearing through the ruin opposite. Dust billowed into the air, shrouding the line of sight. For a few breaths, there was nothing but the sound of settling debris. Callen waited in that silence, letting them burn energy and ammunition. When the dust began to thin, he adjusted slightly, bringing the crosshairs back onto the leader. Through the scope, he could see the faint gleam of alien eyes behind the visor glass. He steadied his breathing, counting the beats. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of ash and metal. Callen exhaled halfway, then squeezed the trigger. Zarnek felt the round strike his shoulder plate, spinning him halfway around. The impact didn't breach the armor, but it sent a jolt through his arm and jarred his weapon from his grip. He dove back into cover, adrenaline flooding his system. The sniper wasn't just aiming to kill now. He was cutting away their options, forcing them to stay pinned. Relvier crawled to his side, her weapon still in hand. "We can't outshoot him." "No," Zarnek said, retrieving his rifle, "but we can make him relocate." They began firing in staggered patterns, one suppressing while the other moved. Their shots weren't random. They were collapsing the space around the sniper's likely position, forcing him to shift or be cornered. Callen saw the change in their tactics. Smart. Dangerous. He slid back from the firing slit, moving through the skeletal frame of the building. His boots made no sound on the debris. Every path had been cleared during his approach. Within seconds, he had a new vantage point, higher and slightly offset from his original line. Through the scope, the aliens were still firing on his former perch. He let them, adjusting the crosshairs to the narrow gap where the leader would have to move next. Zarnek signaled for Relvier to cover him. He sprinted for the next piece of cover, and the world snapped into a moment of pure clarity. The soundless instant when predator and prey both understood what came next. Callen fired. The round pierced the leader's thigh armor, spinning him down hard onto one knee. Pain flared through Zarnek's leg, sharp and hot. He rolled behind cover before the second shot came, his breath hissing between clenched mandibles. Relvier's return fire was wild, more to shield him than a hit. But in that wildness was a truth neither of them wanted a voice. They would not make it out together. Zarnek dragged himself upright, leaning hard on the wall. "Go," he ordered. Relvier shook her head. We both go, or neither does. Callen watched the exchange through the scope, his finger resting on the trigger, but unmoving. There was no rush now. He had time. The kill was certain. Above, the sky deepened toward full dark. The light would be gone soon, and with it the day's hunt. Callen shifted his aim one last time, centering on the leader's chest plate. A single squeeze would finish it. Yet something in the way the two aliens braced together, refusing to abandon the other, stilled his hand for a breath longer than necessary. It was enough for the wind to rise, rattling loose debris and scattering fine dust into his scope's view. He blinked, adjusted, and the moment returned to him. The shot cracked, echoing faintly in the ruin. Zarnak jerked once, then stilled, his body slumping against the wall. Relvier's cry was short, sharp, and cut off as she threw herself over him. Callen lowered the rifle. The hunt was over. He slid back from the wall, gathering his gear. Already the night was swallowing the city, and in darkness, even a sniper could become prey. He moved silently through the rubble, disappearing as easily as he had appeared. Far above, the first stars fought through the haze. In orbit, Vel'thari Command received the faint, intermittent ping of a life signal. One survivor, wounded, crawling toward extraction. And with it, an attached note in the threat assessment file. Human camouflage, effective. Recommend caution. Callen's voice, low and almost amused, broke the silence of his retreat. My camo, he murmured to no one, is death.